Happy Friday, everybody. It is Good Friday, and I know that many of us are going to be celebrating a holiday this weekend, Passover, Easter. So first off, before we get started, just wanted to say that I give you a warm air hug from Florida because we all need a special hug right now. And Jesse McCullough, I am so happy that I could give you an air hug over Ecamm Live right now as well because you have helped put into perspective something that we often talk about as a soft skill, and that is leadership. And I think this conversation should be framed as making leadership a concrete, actionable item that we all need to brush up on because we need leaders in this situation. So thank you so much for being back here in the clutch this week. How is everything going up in Pennsylvania?
Well, it's funny, Michelle, that you mentioned warm hugs from Florida because there's cold hugs in Pennsylvania. Before we turned the camera on here, I was just sharing with Michelle that when I look out my back window, I see snow on the ground, which is not what I expected for the early part of April. But there's a lot of what I didn't expect for April or March, for that matter, and I think that's largely what brings us here today.
So we often talk about leadership and we break it apart in so many different ways, but I think the bottom line is many of us are sitting in our beds at night and either we're asking ourselves, how do we lead our family through this crisis? How do we lead our team through this crisis? Or how do I lead my employees through this crisis? And I think that something we need to consider is there are skill sets that we need prior to something like this happening, because here's the point where we need action. And I think that a lot of people are struggling with, what do I do to lead my team? So how would you break apart this concept of leadership for those people?
Well, we could spend a long time talking about this, Michelle, but I think a couple of things that are so important here is one is just the definition of who's a leader. And I would submit to you that the only thing that qualifies anybody as a leader is to care about somebody, anybody, right? The person to your left, the person to your right, the person that you report to, the person that reports to you. As parents, we have to lead our households, and that so that is the base that we have to understand, because I think a lot of people will sort of give up that leadership role, and they'll say somebody else will take care of that. But now more than ever, we need to be able to step into those roles to be able to lead people through a challenging time. I would suggest to you right now, Michelle, there is not an organization out there that is looking around and saying, "Oh my goodness, we have just way too many leaders here. I don't know what I'm going to do with all these leaders." This is a very valuable resource, and it's something that most organizations, and when I say most, I mean like the large majority, just don't have anywhere near enough of.
How do you pinpoint a leader? You had a great definition. Can you, with all of your leadership training, who would you say right now is being a strong leader in our world?
Well, I tell you, I would say this, that the things that I would look for, I would look for the people who are who are turning on the light at the end of the tunnel for you, right? So I think one of the things that you have to be able to pull you through is you have to have a vision of what the end of this looks like. And, I will say this, that this is not the first crisis that the world has seen. And I'll go a step further and say this is not the last crisis that the world will see. And to that end, we also have to recognize that mankind has survived every crisis before. So we also need to have just go with that perspective that we're going to get through this somehow, some way. So one of the things that I look for is, who are those people who are encouraging you, that saying, hey, there is a better day coming right now. I think that's one thing. The other thing that I would look for is who are those leaders that are communicating regularly? Because one of the things that is so valuable about leadership is the speed of leadership. It builds trust. It builds confidence in what's going on. I was talking about if I didn't have snow in my backyard right now, Michelle, what I would see grass. And the thing is that if I don't take care of my yard, it's going to grow wild and out of control. So what it needs a steady dose of maintenance. And I would liken this in leadership. We need a steady dose of communication. I would say that if you look at the federal or at the federal government, at the state government, you are seeing that. You are seeing regular touch points happening. Now, you may or may not agree with what's being shared. That's not the point of it. The point of it is that they are coming to you and they are giving you some information to let you know what the current developments are, as opposed to being silent. Because in the absence of that communication, it's going to become so easy to jump to unreasonable negative conclusions as far as what's going on.
Oh, so many nuggets right there, Jesse. Let's unpack this Easter basket that you made for us already. Right. Okay, so when we put this conversation in the framework of how do I get beyond this moment? How do I lead in this moment? The first thing that you mentioned is your definition of leadership. Leading the person to the right, the person to the left. That person could be your spouse, it could be your children, it could be employees, whomever. You are the leader. You're choosing to be a part of that role. And I think just the choice of saying, I'm going to do what I need to do to survive this is in and of itself an action step, right? Mm-hmm. So that's step one. And then you start to talk about breaking this idea up into three parts: mindset, speed, and then we were talking about leading versus motivating, which we'll get to. But let's dive into that mindset part, because you talked about the idea of having a vision for the end. So can you describe more about leadership mindset?
Yeah, I tell you, one of the things that when you're leading, you want to be taking people somewhere better. And this is a general statement outside of what we're dealing with right now. But the idea of leadership is you're always going to lead people through something. And generally speaking, you want to lead somebody from a place that's not as good to a place that's better. That requires change. You mentioned you mentioned Passover at the top of this. I mean, that's a great story of leadership. Moses is a great example of leadership. His story is that he is leading the Israelites out of Egypt. From that place to the promised land, a better place, right? That's the whole thing. And it wasn't easy. You follow that story. If you watch the movie, it wasn't an easy story. But that's where we are as leaders. We have to recognize that wherever you're at, you want to be able to lead people to a better place, a higher place than where they're at. Now, the thing you have to fight with that is comfort. Right. There's a lot of people that say, it's really not that bad where I'm at right now. Why do I need to change? And when you find yourself in a crisis, now what a crisis will do is it's going to push you to make a change, and you're going to move some direction. And the leader needs to be able to step in there to help you get to that better place and not just another place.
So the mindset for the leader needs to be focused on the end game. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's whether it's the end game or it's at least a positive point downstream, right? When this all starts, nobody knows exactly what the end game looks like, right? We don't know if we're looking at 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years. I hope it's not 3 years. You look at this thing, and so you may not know where that is. And as a leader, that's okay. You need to understand that that's okay. You don't have to have all the answers, but we need to be able to start to make that movement to get you, your team, your organization, your family, whatever group it is that you're leading, to a better place, and you just go with what that next step is, and you make adjustment. You may find out that you're going in the wrong direction, but as long as you're moving, you're going to be able to make that adjustment to correct course and get where you want to go.
So first, having ownership of a leadership mindset. The second thing you were talking to us about is speed. What do you mean by speed? Speed in communications?
I think, yeah, it's speed so that people know that they matter to you. It very much comes down to the longer you let something go, the more you let outside forces influence what the thought process is. And especially when you're going through a crisis, you hear stories. Whether you hear stories from coworkers, you hear stories through social media, wherever it is, and you can think, oh my goodness, things are going so bad so fast. I don't know that it's appropriate for me to share it here, but I can tell you I had conversations with friends of mine in Oklahoma and friends of mine in New Jersey, and completely different stories that I've heard there, and it may not have been exactly what you thought. I would say that the folks I was talking to in Oklahoma were probably taking things much more seriously than the people in New Jersey. But to that end, what the reason that can happen is that there is communication happening, and it's that regular communication, so that this is what is up to date. This is so what I know. Even if I don't know the right thing to do, I can at least be sharing with you what I know so that we can say this seems to be the best next place for us to head to. And if you let that go too long, people are going to fill in the blanks with all sorts of things that may or may not, coincide with where you're intending to go.
So I often get this question on the communication side is how quickly do you have that team meeting where you say, hey, this is what we're learning is on the horizon, and here's the plan, and here are our action steps to get through it. Does that conversation happen immediately? Should that conversation wait until a perfect plan is in place? How quickly do you start having that communication? So that's question one. And then the second question is the frequency of having that meeting. Is it every day? Is it every week? Is it every other week? How would you answer that?
Well, I think that changes a little bit. So I don't know that there is such a thing as a perfect plan. Somebody gave me this expression long ago whenever I was scheduling, writing a schedule for the staff, and somebody said to me, man plans and God laughs. So you can put together the best plan on paper, and then life is going to come and smack you in the face around that. So I think you need to be able to say, this is the plan, this is what we're going with. You need to have that open line of communication. At one point here several weeks ago, things were changing so rapidly. I don't know that it's possible it may be possible to over communicate, but, at that point it may have been necessary to be, communicating with your staff, say, twice a day. Now I would say that, just be able to start your day off with your team, level set them so that you're all on the same page. You know where you're going. You know what your objectives are to make it through the day, and keep them going. Right now I would opt just for that daily touch point. With the idea that as things become a little more stabilized, you could potentially back that off. But early on there was so much information coming out. I can actually refer back to, I believe it was the H1N1 of flu outbreak a decade ago. And, we were having regular meetings, and there was always something developing, especially in the early going with that. And, without the communication, you find somebody that you haven't communicated with, and they're going to be out in left field doing what they thought was appropriate. And that's not going to be the best use of your resources. You got to keep people together. You got to keep them focused on where those next steps are for us to be moving.
I know when it comes to media, and I equate this to a crisis. For instance, when the Gulf oil spill happened, there were so many different changes. And anytime you're in that situation on the media side, we want updates on a regular basis. So we know when we're going to get new information for the next newscast. And in these days, it's for the next tweet, right? I mean, we need new information constantly. So I always advise people when there's new information to be told, say it. And if that means a frequency of, like you said, the morning, but then maybe it's a midday one, and maybe it's a 4 o'clock one, and then maybe it's when the door closes at the end of the day. Just an overabundance of communication is never a bad thing, because going back to what you were saying, it leaves people with the details of the day. And if they don't have the details of the day or the minute, then they're going to make assumptions that they think are best. And then you lose a little bit of that leadership ability, because then you're not leading because you have variants going in different directions. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. What happens is you want to have people focused and moving in the same direction. And when you don't have that, you have some people that are wandering off this way, some people that are wandering off that way, and it's hard to get the whole group somewhere, right? You need to have them. You need to have them moving together as a unit, and sort of swimming in the same direction, if you will.
So what is this concept that we were chatting about earlier in regards to the idea of leading versus motivating? I think some people would think they have synonymous properties to those two terms.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my mentors said something to me earlier this week. He said, you don't motivate people through a crisis. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And he went on to say, but you do lead people through a crisis. And I think that is such an important difference to make. It's as a leader, your job is not just to give the pep talk and say, go out and give it your best today, Michelle. Right? It's not getting you fired up, but it's to help understand, because you're going to be doing things differently now, right? I mean, how we engage a lot of different aspects of our lives has changed. Now, since we started this, my wife actually came home from picking up groceries. Right, she's not going into the grocery store, but she's getting curbside pickup. That's different. And if you turn that around and you say, okay, you're in the grocery store, business is different, right? You're the way you're taking care of your customers is changing. And whether you're I mean, my wheelhouse is pharmacy, right? You have that. There's a lot of pharmacies now that are closing the front door, and they're doing a lot of work through a drive-through. They're doing a lot of work through a curbside pickup. They're doing a lot of work through home delivery, and that's exercising different muscles. You just don't say, go out there and get them today, guys. You're going to help. You need to be able to help them navigate through what those new processes are, so that they can repeat and repeat and repeat and get better and get better. And as they do that, they're going to say, especially if you're an empowering leader, you're going to be able to give them the freedom to say, hey, you know what, this is the way it's going. I think this is better. And you open that up so that you can really get some synergy in building an improved system to be able to care for the people that you serve.
So I think it's interesting we laid out how to deal with the crisis in those action items of developing the right mindset, the speed, and then make sure you're leading versus motivating. But I wonder the conversations that go on in a boardroom these days. Humana and Cigna making the moves not to charge people for their healthcare COVID-19 related, no copays. That in and of itself is a leadership action. So I wonder, in the boardroom, are people saying to themselves, what can we do to claim a leadership role here that is going to be different and jaw-dropping for either our customers or for our employees? What do you think, if you were a fly on the wall, would we be hearing in those boardroom conversations?
Oh, I tell you, I'm sure they're saying something to the effect of, how do we serve our members, right? Because as you go into something new, and especially with what we're dealing with right now, there is the way we have always done things. But if we do the things the way we have always done things, you may end up with something much more difficult to solve downstream. So coming out and taking some of these strong stances, like, hey, it's covered, no out of pocket cost, whatever, because what we want to do is we want to get ahead of this and we want to solve it. And I would suggest that may not be the best solution financially for them in the near term, but it's probably one that would definitely pay dividends for them downstream, right? So by doing this, if we have fewer sick people now versus 6 months from now, that becomes a very, very reasonable conversation to be happening. Now, there may have been some different perspectives. There may have been, how are we going to treat this? My understanding is that there's over 100 different studies going on appropriate treatments and stuff. There's all sorts of things that are going in there, and they're saying, how can I be part of the solution versus how can I delay the problem? And I appreciate all those organizations that are doing things. You and I were talking beforehand about the car insurance companies that are saying, hey, people aren't driving. I thought about this the other day. How many car wrecks are there actually happening right now? I'm thinking very, very few, because driving is way, way down. And so they're doing something to say, you know what, there's going to be people that are going to be facing financial challenges right now. Let's release some of the pressure there, and we're going whatever they're doing, whether it's a refund or a credit or however it's being done. They're looking at ways, how can they serve their customer? How can they serve their communities? And I tell you, I think that's something that we can all learn from, right? How can you and I serve our communities? We're meeting together in this format to share some different ideas and to stimulate some thoughts. There's ways for all of us to be contributing to the solution versus what can I do and potentially delay the problem.
So if you had a brainstorm right now, if you're an office administrator, in the healthcare space, if you work where there are some elective surgeries, I'm trying to throw out different scenarios. If we could brainstorm for them a little bit of something that could really serve their community, what would it be?
I tell you, and I look at this through the lens of pharmacists, and specifically community pharmacists. So I'm not going to put on a hat for elective surgery, because I'm sure I don't know enough about that. But I say, do all the things that you can do to serve your customers, right? The solution is what's best for your people. So as a pharmacist, one of the things that we can do to help the healthcare system overall is, we can be checking in on our customers with chronic conditions. For example, Michelle, if you had high blood pressure, I'm sure you don't, but if you did, calling you up and saying, hey, Michelle, have you been checking your blood pressure? How's that going for you? And just making sure that we're controlling the different things that we can control, and reducing the stress on the system to the best of our ability. And also at the same time, you're building a relationship, a stronger relationship with your customer. Now, I picked high blood pressure. You can look at asthma. You could look at other lung disease. You could look at diabetes. You could look, especially some of these high risk conditions that we hear discussed around COVID-19. I would say, how can you just really serve those folks? And perhaps it's looking to say, hey, I see that you have a prescription for this ready. Can we go ahead and get that ready for you and send it out? Because we just want to stay ahead of the game.
Do you identify patients who may be dealing with a shortage of medication down the pike, and do you have them a part of that conversation with you or not?
Well, I'll tell you, it's been interesting. I've spent an awful lot of time on the phone over the last couple of weeks and talking with some of my friends in the various parts of the distribution chain. And it sounds like things are largely okay. Now, as soon as I say that, somebody will watch this video and say, I can't get my hands on fill in the blank. And I'm sure there's going to be some exceptions. But, to this, my best advice is to be as proactive as possible, because if you find, and drug shortages are not new. They have happened all the time. It's just that the context within a drug shortage would happen today would be much more challenging, right? And for a lot of conditions out there, there are alternatives that are alternative treatments that you can look to leverage. And by being proactive, then you're on the cutting edge of that versus all of a sudden somebody showing up saying, I'm out of medicine. What am I supposed to do? And what you have available is less than ideal.
So many good things, Jesse. You know I love your Jesse-isms.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to put a leadership principle into a Jesse-ism, what would it be?
Uh-oh. Well, I tell you, the one that I picked up this morning, I'm stealing this one, but I haven't really worked it out. But when you look at the word emergency, there is a base word in there. And so while we are in an emergency, the base word is emerge. And I think as leaders, we have the opportunity to emerge and serve people to a new and a higher and better level, even within the context of an emergency. So that's not as polished as what you normally get, Michelle. I'm working on that one, but I share that one. That's hot off the press. That's about as good
hot
as
off
I
my
got
brain.
Yeah.
I love that one because it gives you the visual of the word emergency, and then emerge is something that I think could really stick with people. I know it sticks with me. Jesse, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let's tell people the series that you've been doing on your Facebook group page about leadership.
Yeah, so I have I just as a little bit of background, I am still relatively new to the leadership industry. I've probably been playing around in here the last 5 or 6 years, and it's really just been something that's captured my imagination. So I have a little Facebook group specifically for pharmacists, but I welcome all comers called Keystone Pharmacy Insights. And what I do is I just try to drop in and just give a thought. Usually around midday. Sometimes it's a little earlier, sometimes it's a little bit later, but just give you a thought to try to help frame the day, perhaps change your perspective. What I've learned and really what captured my imagination with leadership is oftentimes what we did as leaders is just what somebody before us did, be it right or be it wrong. And, I think that it's necessary to continue to challenge some of those thoughts so that you may find a better way to serve the people in your community, in your organization, on your team, in your department, wherever it turns out to be. So this week I've actually had a little 5-part series where we talked about leading during a crisis and just some of these different things. And thank you, Michelle. You've given the opportunity. We've actually touched a little bit on a couple of those things that I talked about this week. But I'm pretty sure the crisis won't be gone by Monday, and I'll probably be back at it on Monday. So that's where we are.
I think it's also important to tell people that these videos are not super long. They're literally drop-ins, so they're very edible, as I like to say, soundbite form, where you could go into Jesse's Facebook group, listen, and really have a different viewpoint of how you want the day to play out. And it could really change your perspective on a lot of different stuff. So I appreciate you, Jesse. Thank you so much.
Well, I have to credit you, Michelle. Michelle and I met 3-4 years ago now, and she was talking about the power of live video, and I thought, what on earth does that have to do with pharmacy? I'm using it now, and I'll tell you, even just in the setup here today, you have no idea how Michelle can take lemons and make lemonade. She said, you got to move your camera, you got to move it up, you got to move it down. So whether you think I look good or not here today, let me tell you this, I looked a lot worse before we started. And in about 30 seconds, Michelle had that fixed. And so let me encourage anybody, if you're, anybody that's watching, you're obviously following Michelle right now, but lean into her. She has a lot of tremendous information and can do an awful lot to help you improve wherever you're at. And she can, she does it in soundbite form, right? She's able to compress that and do a lot of just tremendous stuff. So thank you, Michelle.
I love you, Jesse. Thank you so much for saying that. I love making sure that people are feeling as good as they could possibly feel before they press go live on their camera. Awesome.
It wasn't easy at first. Oh my goodness. I can't tell you how close I got and then pulled back close. And then I said, oh, hey, you know what? You do it and you get better. And it's the repetitions. And it's a tremendous skill to develop, and you're a tremendous one to help people develop that.
Thank you so much. We're all vulnerable. My first live shot on air in television news, I had, in typical Florida fashion, we have these ants called fire ants that bite your feet and they sting. And in my very first live shot, I had an ant bite sting my foot. And it took everything in my power not to just scream on air. And I liken that to what a lot of people are going through, like, what is going to happen when I go live? As you said so eloquently, Jesse, you could have the best plan and then God steps in and the plan is thrown up in the air. So just do it, right? Just do it so you can make the mistakes and you could get through that vulnerable stage so you could feel more confident.
Yeah, it's so much easier to steer a car that's moving than one that's parked, right? So just get moving. If you're going in the wrong direction, turn the wheel and make a correction.
Yeah, and who cares if you make a mistake? Like, I remember being a young child, my mom, and this framed my entire life. I used to be the girl in class that asked a million questions. I mean, it was bad. Like, I would always be like, me again, me again. And my mom would always say to me, well, why wouldn't you ask more questions? And why not get more information? And what is the worst thing that could happen? They say no more questions. What is the worst thing that could happen if you go live? You make a mistake, you screw up, who cares? Right? You got to back on the bike.
And the converse is, what's the best thing that can happen?
Yeah.
Right? The best thing that's happened is you start to build that relationship, right? And you advance the message. So I think that's an important thing to consider as well.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, Jesse, thank you so much. Have a good rest of your Friday and happy holidays. If people are watching this, we are coming up on Easter. If this is a recording that you may take up in next week or whatever. So it needs to be a hopeful time because we're just downtrodden with bad news, right? So let's give each other air hugs. Like we started off this conversation, we'll end it with another air hug. All right, Jesse, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Michelle.
All right, see you guys next week. Bye.